The gentle chime of a bell announced their arrival at Timeless Toys, a store that had stood on the corner of Main Street for over 30 years. The little girl's eyes sparkled with excitement as she stepped into what seemed like a magical wonderland. She had earned straight A's on her report card, and her father had promised her any toy she wanted as a reward for her hard work. The store was everything a child could dream of. Rows of colorful dolls lined the shelves, their friendly faces seeming to welcome every young visitor. Board games were stacked neatly in one corner, while remote-controlled cars zoomed around a display track nearby. The sweet smell of strawberry-scented stickers mixed with the fresh plastic scent of new toys, creating that special toy store atmosphere that every kid knows and loves. The father watched his daughter with pride as she carefully made her way through the aisles. He remembered his own childhood visits to toy stores, though they had been rare treats back then. Now, as a successful business owner, he could give his daughter these special moments, and nothing made him happier than seeing her joy. She moved with careful respect through the store, gently touching each toy she was interested in, always remembering to put them back exactly where she found them. Her father had taught her well about treating things with care, whether they belonged to her or not. Other customers in the store couldn't help but smile at her obvious delight and good manners. The little girl particularly loved the science section, where telescopes and microscopes promised adventures in discovery. She lingered over a chemistry set, reading every word on the box with the same dedication she showed to her schoolwork. Her father noticed this interest with approval. Perhaps she would grow up to be a scientist, he thought. Time seemed to slow down in that magical space. The father and daughter talked about each toy, imagining the fun they could have with it. He asked her questions about why she liked certain things, and she gave thoughtful answers that made him even prouder. This wasn't just a shopping trip. It was a precious moment between father and child. Other children ran past them, some loud and excited, but the little girl maintained her composed demeanor. She had inherited her father's sense of dignity, even at her young age. When she found a beautiful doll with curly hair like hers, her eyes lit up, but she still handled it with gentle care. The sunlight streaming through the store's front windows created dancing patterns on the floor, and the little girl hopped from one patch of light to another, making a game of it while staying close to her father. The whole scene was peaceful, joyful, exactly what a childhood memory should be. At that moment, everything felt perfect. The father took pictures on his phone, wanting to capture his daughter's innocent happiness. Neither of them had any idea that their ordinary Saturday afternoon was about to become extraordinary in ways they never expected. The peaceful shopping experience changed in an instant. As the little girl examined a beautiful doll with her father nearby, she noticed a shadow looming over her. The store owner, a man in his 60s with graying hair and wire-rimmed glasses, had been watching them since they entered. He'd been following them from aisle to aisle, though they hadn't realized it at first. The owner's footsteps grew closer, his shoes making sharp sounds against the polished floor. Other customers turned to look as he approached, his face twisted with an unpleasant expression that seemed out of place in a toy store meant for children's joy. The little girl held the doll closer, suddenly feeling scared though she'd done nothing wrong. "Put that down and get out." The owner's voice boomed through the store, causing several young children to jump. "I've been watching you, and I know what you're trying to do." His finger pointed accusingly at the little girl, who stood frozen in shock, her small hands trembling as she carefully placed the doll back on its shelf. The father stepped forward, positioning himself between his daughter and the angry store owner. "Excuse me?" he said calmly, though his heart was racing. "My daughter hasn't done anything wrong. We're paying customers here to buy a reward for her good grades." But the owner wouldn't listen. His voice grew louder, drawing even more attention. "I saw her. She was planning to steal that doll. I've dealt with her kind before." The words hung in the air like poison, their real meaning clear to everyone who heard them. Other customers stopped their shopping, some pulling out their phones, others gathering closer to watch the scene unfold. The little girl began to cry quietly, holding onto her father's hand. She didn't understand why this was happening. Just moments ago, she had been having the best day, and now this man was saying horrible things about her. Her father squeezed her hand gently, letting her know he was there, that she was safe. "Sir," the father spoke again, his voice steady despite the anger he felt rising inside. "My daughter is 8 years old. She's an honor roll student. We came here to buy her a toy, and I won't let you treat her this way." He pulled out his wallet, showing the owner his business card and ID. "I own the accounting firm 3 blocks from here." Other customers began to murmur, some shaking their heads at the owner's behavior. A young mother with her own children stepped closer, ready to speak up in defense of the little girl. An elderly woman who had been shopping for her grandchildren clutched her chest, visibly upset by what she was witnessing. The owner's face reddened, but he didn't back down. "I don't care who you are. I want you both out of my store right now." He gestured wildly toward the exit, his voice cracking with emotion. The little girl pressed her face against her father's side, trying to hide from the scary man's angry words. The father reached slowly into his pocket, maintaining eye contact with the owner. His hand emerged holding not a wallet, but a phone. With deliberate calmness, he pressed the record button, and that simple action would soon change everything. The atmosphere in the store shifted as other customers began pulling out their phones too, understanding that they were witnessing something important, something that needed to be documented. The father's hands were steady as he held his phone, though inside, his heart was pounding with a familiar anger. He had faced moments like this before, too many times before. But this time was different. This time, his little girl was watching, and he knew his response would teach her more than any words ever could. "I want you to explain, on camera, exactly what you saw my daughter doing," he said, his voice carrying the weight of years of similar experiences. The store owner's face changed as he realized he was being recorded. The man who had been so bold just moments ago began to stutter, his accusations becoming less certain with each word. The father thought about his own father's words from years ago. "Your strongest weapon is your dignity." Those words had carried him through difficult times, through service in the military, through building his business from nothing. Now they guided him as he stood protecting his daughter, showing her how to face injustice with strength and grace. "My daughter," he continued, his voice clear and controlled, "has been taught to respect property, to be honest, and to hold her head high. What she's learning from you right now is something no child should have to learn." Other customers nodded in agreement, some wiping tears from their eyes as they watched this father maintain his composure in the face of such unfair treatment. The little girl had stopped crying now, drawing strength from her father's calmness. She stood straighter, though she kept hold of his hand. Around them, the toy store had become completely silent except for the cheerful background music that seemed strangely out of place now. A young store clerk, who had been watching everything, stepped forward. "Sir," she addressed her boss, the store owner, "I've been watching too. This little girl and her father have done nothing wrong. I can't stand by and let this happen." Her voice shook, but she stood her ground, knowing she might lose her job, but unable to stay silent. The father gave her a grateful nod, then turned back to the owner. "You've shown us who you are," he said quietly. "Now I'm going to show you who I am. I'm not leaving quietly. I'm not going to let you brush this under the rug. My daughter deserves better. Every child deserves better." Other parents in the store began to gather their children, heading for the exit, but not before telling the owner they would never shop there again. Several stopped to give the father their contact information, offering to be witnesses to what they had seen. The support of strangers felt like a warm embrace around both father and daughter. The father's phone kept recording as the owner's face went from red to pale, as the reality of what he had done began to sink in. Years of running a successful business could crumble in minutes because of his actions, and he was starting to realize it. But the father wasn't thinking about revenge or ruin. He was thinking about change, about making sure this never happened to another child. In his mind, he was already planning his next steps. He would turn this moment of pain into something powerful, something that would make a difference. He looked down at his daughter, seeing not just her hurt, but her growing understanding of how to stand up for what's right. In that moment, he was teaching her that courage doesn't always roar. Sometimes it's a steady voice with a camera phone, standing firm in the face of wrongdoing. The video spread like wildfire across social media that evening. People shared it with their friends, family, and followers, adding their own stories of similar experiences. What started as one father's stand for his daughter quickly became something much bigger. By nightfall, the toy store incident had touched hearts across the city and beyond. Local news channels picked up the story. A reporter who had covered community issues for 20 years recognized its importance immediately. She arrived at the father's accounting office early the next morning, not just looking for a story, but seeking to understand the deeper impact of what had happened. The father's calm dignity in the video had moved her, and she wanted to help share his message with the world. The waiting room of his office was already full of people wanting to show support. There was the elderly lady from the store, clutching a teddy bear she wanted to give to his daughter. A group of local business owners had come to express their solidarity. Even the young store clerk who had spoken up was there, having quit her job that morning because she couldn't work for someone who would treat a child that way. People began sharing their own experiences outside the toy store. A mother spoke about how she'd always held her purse tight when she shopped there, feeling the owner's suspicious eyes on her. A grandfather talked about how he'd stopped taking his grandchildren there because of the way they were treated. Each story added another piece to a puzzle that had been hidden for too long. The local civil rights group called for a community meeting. The community center's main room, usually only half full for such events, was packed to overflowing. People stood along the walls and sat in the aisles, all united by a desire to make things right. The father hadn't planned to speak, but when he stood up, the room fell silent. His daughter sat in the front row, no longer crying, but watching everything with wide, understanding eyes. She saw how her father's quiet strength had awakened something in their community. People who had never spoken up before found their voices. Those who had felt alone in their experiences now found themselves surrounded by support. On social media, the numbers kept growing. The video had been viewed millions of times. Comments poured in from across the country, many from parents sharing similar stories, others from people promising to check their own behavior and stand up when they saw injustice. The hashtag Toy Store Truth started trending, becoming a symbol for standing up against discrimination with dignity. Local shop owners began putting up signs in their windows. All children welcome here. It wasn't just about one store anymore. It was about making their whole community a better place. A teacher at the daughter's school used the incident as a lesson in civic responsibility and standing up for what's right. The children had discussions about fairness and respect, turning a painful moment into a learning opportunity. The father kept his phone with all the messages of support. Each night, he would read some to his daughter, showing her how their difficult moment had sparked hope in others. She began to understand that sometimes the hardest experiences could lead to the most important changes. The tears from that day in the toy store had transformed into determination to make a difference. The local Chamber of Commerce called an emergency meeting on a warm Tuesday evening. The grand old building downtown, usually reserved for quiet business discussions, buzzed with energy. Shop owners from every street in the business district had come, along with community leaders and concerned citizens. Every chair was taken, with people standing against the walls, all united by a shared purpose. The father hadn't expected to speak that night. He had come to listen, still processing everything that had happened since that Saturday at the toy store. But when the chamber president asked him to share his thoughts, he knew this was another important moment. His daughter sat in the audience between two kind elderly ladies who had brought her cookies, watching her father with proud eyes. As he walked to the podium, memories flooded his mind. Memories of his own childhood, of lessons learned from his parents, of struggles overcome. He hadn't planned a speech, but his heart knew exactly what to say. "I'm not here to destroy a business," he began, his voice soft but clear. "I'm here to help build a better community for all our children." The room fell silent, every person leaned forward to listen. He shared his vision of a community where every child could walk into any store without fear, where every parent could shop without being followed, where dignity and respect weren't privileges but rights. His words weren't angry, they were full of hope and possibility. Other business owners stood up to speak. The owner of the local bookstore announced she would start a reading program featuring books about understanding and acceptance. The ice cream shop owner promised to train his teenage employees about treating everyone with respect. The hardware store owner offered to sponsor workshops about creating welcoming businesses. A surprising moment came when the owner of a large department store stood up. His hands were shaking as he spoke about how his own grandmother had faced discrimination years ago. "We can't change the past," he said, his voice breaking, "but we can change the future." He announced a scholarship program for local students who showed leadership in promoting community unity. The young clerk who had stood up to her boss at the toy store received special recognition. Several business owners offered her jobs on the spot, impressed by her courage. She chose to work at a new children's boutique, where she could continue making children feel welcome and valued. Community groups began organizing regular meetings to discuss how to make their town more inclusive. The local schools asked to be involved, wanting to teach children about standing up for what's right. Even the police department sent representatives to learn from the community's response to the incident. What touched the father most was watching his daughter during these meetings. She no longer seemed sad about what had happened. Instead, she was drawing pictures of what she called her dream toy store, a place where every child felt special and welcome. Her drawings showed children of all backgrounds playing together, with smiling store workers helping everyone. The Chamber of Commerce meeting lasted hours longer than planned, but nobody wanted to leave. People were sharing phone numbers, making plans, forming committees. The energy in the room wasn't just about anger or protest. It was about hope, about building something better together. The father realized that sometimes it takes a moment of darkness to help people find their light. A week after the Chamber of Commerce meeting, something unexpected happened. The toy store owner reached out through a community mediator, asking to meet with the father privately. The mediator, a gentle-voiced woman who had been bringing people together for 30 years, suggested they meet at her office, a neutral space where honest conversations could happen. The father thought carefully about the request. His daughter, wise beyond her years, told him, "Maybe he needs to learn, Daddy, like you always teach me." Those simple words helped him make his decision. He agreed to the meeting, though he wasn't sure what to expect. The meeting room was small and comfortable, with soft chairs and warm lighting. When the toy store owner walked in, he looked different from the angry man at the store. His shoulders were slumped, his face tired, as if he hadn't slept well in days. He sat down heavily, hands clasped tightly in his lap. At first, neither man spoke. The silence felt heavy with 30 years of the store owner's assumptions and a lifetime of the father's experiences. The mediator quietly poured them each a cup of tea, letting them find their own way to begin. Finally, the store owner looked up, his eyes wet with tears. "I've lost everything," he said quietly. "But I realize now that I lost it long before that day in the store. I lost it every time I let fear and prejudice guide my actions." His voice cracked as he spoke about growing up in a different time, about the things his own father had taught him, about how he had never questioned these old ways of thinking until now. The father listened, remembering his own father's words about the importance of hearing people out. As the store owner spoke, decades of built-up walls began to crumble. He shared stories about his childhood, about running the store for 30 years, about how the world had changed around him while he had stayed stuck in the past. Then it was the father's turn to speak. He talked about his own childhood, about the daily challenges his family had faced. He described what it felt like to achieve success through hard work, only to still face discrimination. Most importantly, he spoke about his hopes for his daughter's future, a future where she would be judged by her character, not her appearance. Hours passed as they talked. The mediator barely needed to speak. The conversation flowed naturally as both men shared their stories. The store owner began to understand the deep pain his actions had caused, not just to one little girl, but to countless customers over the years. The father saw something he hadn't expected: a person capable of change. They talked about their families, their hopes, their fears. The store owner shared old photographs of when he first opened the shop, speaking about his original dream of making children happy. Somewhere along the way, he had lost sight of that dream, letting fear cloud his view of who those children could be. As evening approached, something had shifted in the room. The tension had transformed into understanding. The store owner asked what he could do to make things right, not just as a business decision, but as a human being who had finally opened his eyes. The father thought about his daughter's dream toy store drawings and began to share her vision of what the store could become. The meeting ended not with handshakes, but with both men standing in silence, acknowledging the weight of what had happened. They had started the day as symbols, the discriminator and the discriminated against, but were ending it as two fathers, two businessmen, two human beings who had found common ground in their shared humanity. 2 weeks after the private meeting, the toy store reopened its doors. The windows, once cluttered with random posters, now displayed a beautiful rainbow of decorations made by local children. A new sign hung proudly above the entrance: "Every child's toy store, where dreams are welcome." Inside, the transformation was even more striking. The store owner had rearranged everything, creating wider aisles where parents with strollers could easily move around. Play areas were set up where children could test toys before buying them. Most importantly, new staff members reflected the diversity of the community they served. The little girl who had faced rejection in this same store now stood near the entrance, holding a big red ribbon for the reopening ceremony. Her father stood beside her, amazed at how much had changed in just a few weeks. When the store owner approached them, he knelt down to the girl's eye level. "I want you to be the first customer in our new store," he said softly. "But more than that, I want you to be part of our toy store family. Would you like to help us make sure every child feels welcome here?" The girl looked up at her father, who nodded encouragingly, then back at the store owner with a bright smile. The store owner had done more than just apologize. He had created a scholarship fund for local children, using a portion of the store's profits to help kids afford educational toys and books. He had hired experts to train his staff about treating everyone with respect and dignity. Most surprisingly, he had asked the father to join a newly formed community advisory board that would help guide the store's policies. Local news cameras rolled as the little girl cut the ribbon. The crowd that gathered wasn't there to protest anymore. They were there to celebrate change. Children rushed in excitedly, their parents following with tears of joy in their eyes. The young clerk who had stood up for what was right was now the assistant manager, greeting everyone with genuine warmth. The toy store became a symbol of transformation in the community. Other business owners started asking for advice on making their shops more welcoming. The store began hosting monthly community events where children from all backgrounds could play together. Reading circles, science demonstrations, and craft sessions filled the calendar. The father watched as his daughter gave other children tours of her favorite sections in the store. She had become a regular presence there, helping younger kids find the perfect toy, suggesting books to parents, and making everyone feel special. Her own experience of rejection had turned into a mission to spread joy. One quiet evening, as the store was about to close, the owner found a drawing left on his desk. It showed two figures, a man and a child, holding hands in front of a colorful toy store. Written in crayon at the bottom were the words, "Thank you for learning to love everybody." He carefully pinned it to his office wall, a daily reminder of how far they had all come. The story spread beyond their town, inspiring other communities to look at themselves more closely. People began to understand that real change was possible when hearts and minds opened up. The father and daughter had started something much bigger than themselves, a ripple of kindness that continued to grow. What had begun as a moment of pain had transformed into a lesson about courage, forgiveness, and the power of standing up for what's right. The toy store wasn't just a shop anymore. It was proof that when people choose to learn and grow, beautiful things can happen.